This is Money Guide with Mary Sterk from Sterk Financial Services. Now, here's Mary Sterk.
Welcome to Money Guide with Mary Sterk. I am Mary Sterk, founding partner and CEO of Sterk Financial Services. You know, we're really lucky we have a handful of very talented female financial advisors who know a lot of things about money and finance. And so today we're going to have a couple of those advisors talk to you about a very important topic. You won't want to miss it.
Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Julie Chadwick, and I have with me Kelsey Bankey. We're partners and investors at Sterk Financial Services.
Hello. We are talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act again today. Lots was in that legislation, and so we're kind of taking it piece by piece. Not going to cover necessarily all of it, but we're going to cover some of the things that we think most impact investors and retirees. So today, the topic, this is a really interesting one, probably one not too many people have heard of or totally understand. This one is on qualified opportunity zones or qualified opportunity funds. There's two parts to kind of the same thing. So a qualified opportunity zone was created as a part of a bipartisan effort to drive long-term private investment into economically distressed communities in the United States. They were originally signed into law back in 2017 as part of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And so that was started back in 2017. This One Big Beautiful Bill Act made some changes to it. I think most of the changes are good changes for investors, but we want to walk through some of those changes. So I know I've said a lot already, but hang in with us. This one's kind of complicated and it's not the right thing for everybody. This is the point of this is not to make recommendations, but to provide education on this topic. So first and foremost, what was the technical law change? So what actually happened in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act? And that is, it first of all makes the qualified opportunity zones permanent. It creates rolling 10-year qualified opportunity zone designations. And it creates some changes that are aimed at improving the accountability and long-term impact, as well as geographic equity. So when we say permanent, anything that's permanent in the tax world is only permanent until Congress changes it again. What we mean by that is it's not going to sunset. The previous act, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017, had these sunsetting at the end of 2026. So that's not currently set to happen anymore.
So basically, it's as long as the current administration usually, right?
Well, you know, this had bipartisan support. So I don't know that this will necessarily be a party by party issue. Right. But you're exactly right. Like their Congress could come in, a different Congress could come in and they could choose to repeal these down the road. Who knows? But I feel like these are probably around for quite a while because it's kind of a win-win in a lot of different areas.
So really everything she kind of started talking off of, what does it mean in plain English? Really, to understand that, we have to understand the history of QOZs is what I'm going to call them. So really, like Kelsey said, they entered into the tax code in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act in 2017, okay? Basically, the goal was to spur economic growth and create jobs, improve communities that normally don't receive substantial private investment. So kind of like undeserved or low in income areas, right? So investors, and is what happened is investors could take realized capital gains and invest them in a qualified opportunity fund and then receive tax benefits for it. So there were certain stipulations, like it had to be completed within 180 days, and there were certain windows and qualifications for it. And we're going to kind of go over those, but that in a nutshell was what it was. So it's really an opportunity. And like she said, it had bipartisan approval because they wanted to be able to improve these areas and maybe get investors to come into them.
Yeah, there were a couple of, I believe they're senators, senators that said, you know, what can we do to entice people to invest in lower income areas all across the country? So not just in specific parts, all across the country, all 50 states had these designated qualified opportunity zone areas. And so they said, well, if we have people take the capital gains that they've made in any given year, okay, and take those capital gains and put that investment into projects in these qualified opportunity zones. And it could be all sorts of kind of real estate projects, right? It's not, it's a lot of times going to be apartments and some retail, but it can be any kind of development, really, is what you'll find in those qualified opportunity zones. So people can take their capital gains, put them in these qualified opportunity funds, is what they're called. So QOF. So when we're saying QOZ, it's kind of talking about the whole thing, but technically the investment you make is into a qualified opportunity fund. And the fund is then investing in different, you know, programs and projects in those areas. So capital gains are the only thing that can go in there. So if you don't have any capital gains, you can't put money into one of these programs. So you can't take your income, your paycheck, you can't take rental income or anything like that and put it into these. It has to actually be something that on your taxes would be classified as a capital gain and subject to capital gain taxes. Okay. Now that can be capital gains from investments. It can be capital gains from selling a business, capital gains from selling land. Lots of different things can generate capital gains. There's no rule on what kind of capital gains. It just has to be that category of money. Okay.
Right.
So you can take capital gains. Now there's a 180-day period Julie just mentioned. That is a really strict 180 days. And it's not
Hard
180.
line.
Yeah. Hard line. It
Yeah.
is not 180 business days. It's not close to 100 days. It's not a guideline. It is a very strict line. So if you're thinking to yourself, I have capital gains, I might want to do something like this. It has to be within 100 days, 180 days of when you received the proceeds that generated the capital gain. So if you sold an asset of any kind today and you received the money today, so if it was sold as of today and you no longer own it, that starts your 180-day clock. Okay. So very strict. I just want to bring that up because people kind of get hung up on that one sometimes. All right. So what are the tax benefits? Let's talk about that. So tax benefits under the old plan, which goes through 2026. So through the end of 2026, we're under the original QOZ rules. Capital gains had tax deferral through December 31st of 2026. So this started back in 2017. So anytime between 2017 and 2026, if you participated in this, the capital gains that you put into that, you did not have to pay capital gains tax on yet. It was tax deferred until the end of December 31st, 2026. So you paid the tax on it in your tax filing that you do before, tax filing deadline in 2027. So you got to defer tax, which is a really nice feature, because you could utilize that. Like in this case, it's getting invested and it's delaying your tax payment and allowing your money to grow even more, maybe assuming it's earning before you have to turn around and pay tax on it.
Right. So how did they come up with these areas? It was kind of geographic areas, like we said, maybe underprivileged areas or low income areas. So they were nominated, like Kelsey said earlier too, like by state governors as eligible low income census tracts within their states. Those were nominated to be the qualified opportunity zones. Then the U.S. Treasury Department and the IRS, they would have to go through and they would have to certify these nominations because not anybody could just throw it in there and say, hey, we're one of these zones. So originally there were more like 8,000 different zones across the United States. And again, like we said, those were set to expire in 2026, so now made permanent. And hopefully that's something that continues because the goal is to be able to get improvements and get investors into these areas.
Yeah, and that was based off of an old census. So
Yeah.
the flaw in the original system, and again, they were kind of trying it out to see if people liked it, and I think they figured out people like it and they want to continue having it. But it was based off of an old census. So new going forward, it'll be based off of, whatever the most current census is. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how that happens. So the capital gains deferral was just part of the benefit of going into this. There was a second part, which is that people would get a partial gain exclusion on the capital gains. Now, this was a feature that really needed to have improvement. It was a nice feature, but really only people who invested in the first 5 years of the qualified opportunity zones coming out of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act got this benefit. Because there was that hard sunset in December 31st, 2026, people who invested in the last 5 years of this qualified opportunity zone period didn't really get that exclusion. So we'll talk about that a little bit more here in just a moment. And then lastly, and probably, um, probably one of the best features, in my opinion, is that there's tax-free appreciation on the asset. So if you took, $500,000 of capital gains and put it in a qualified opportunity zone, if you held it for 10 years, you would get to have all the earnings on that position, on that $500,000 position, after a 10-year period of time, become tax-free.
We love tax-free.
Yep. I was just gonna say it. Tax-free money is my favorite kind of money.
We love
So, especially with higher earners, as well as retirees, they don't necessarily have as many opportunities to get money into tax-free treatment, such as Roths and things like that. So this is kind of a big deal. You can set aside an asset, you get immediate tax relief, by getting to defer the capital gains. Under the new rule, more people are going to qualify for the partial gain exclusion, which we'll talk about in a moment. But then also you get tax-free earnings as long as you have a 10-year holding period. So 3 really interesting ways to really entice people to put money into these funds, effectively getting money into areas that need some additional investment for development. And so it's just an interesting and kind of cool program.
It's really a great idea to be able to improve those areas and also help people, make an investment out of it and then get some tax saving strategies out of it as well. So
Absolutely.
Now we've kind of gone over the history of it. We're going to go into kind of what the new changes are going to be. We've kind of went into them a little bit, but all this, remember, begins in 2027. So this is when we're going to start with the new stuff. So for existing things that you have, it's just they're not going to sunset. So now these are some of the changes in the new Bill Act that we're going to cover.
Congratulations to Mary Sterk and the team at Sterk Financial for earning a spot on multiple Forbes lists for 8 years running, including the 2025 Forbes Best in State Wealth Advisors and 2025 Forbes Top Women Wealth Advisors Best in State.
Yeah, so we still have, a little bit longer under the old rules, but once we hit 2027, January 1st, all investment at that point then becomes under these new rules. So let's start with the deferral of the capital gains. So before you deferred, this is one where it's like partially better, just depending on when you got into the program. So people who got into the qualified opportunity zones really early got, almost 10 years. They got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of tax deferral, depending on when they went in. Under the new law, under the new rules, everybody, regardless of when you go into the qualified opportunity zones, gets 5 years.
Yeah.
And so what's nice about that is that's going to encourage people to continue to invest. So qualified opportunity zones these last couple of years, they only had 1, 2, 3, 4 years of deferral, depending on when they went in. So it was kind of, there was an equity between people who early adopted this and people who adopted it later. And honestly, for the size that you have to invest in these, it's, sometimes you don't have that kind of capital gain every single year. You might sell a business in a single year or sell a farm in a single year, and that makes sense in that year. And so for people that happened, in 2024, let's say they only got 2 years of tax deferral versus people who got it in 2018 had, 8 years of tax deferral. So, that's one feature that they changed. So regardless of when you put the money in, everybody gets 5 years of tax deferral from that date. So your taxes will be due the tax season following the 5th year of investment.
Right. The partial gain exclusion was also changed a little bit too. So on the standard qualified opportunity funds, the previous step basis increases 10% after 5 years and then 15% after 7. So that's been replaced with a simplified straight 10% basis step up after the 5-year holding period with investments in there made after 2026. So that's really helpful too. Again, it's just kind of simplifying a little bit, which we love it when they do that. And then so that's standard QOFs, and then rural QOFs in the Big Beautiful Bill Act introduced QROFs, which offer a 30% basis step up after 5 years for investments in rural areas, in designated rural areas. So that was a big add too.
Yeah, and I'll be really curious to see how they end up,
Mm-hmm.
how this part ends up impacting things, because I will tell you, most of the qualified opportunity zones were in urban areas.
Yeah.
I don't really know of many that had much rural investment. And so it's interesting because now there's tax incentive for people to want a rural fund. And
Mm-hmm.
coming from the Midwest, right? We love that. We love the concept of investment in some more rural areas. Not that I want my cornfields and everything to go away, but it'd be nice for some of that investment to come to areas that aren't just big urban cities. But because the funds haven't really been doing that, I don't know who the players are going to be in that space. So it'll be
Right.
interesting as we get to 2027 to see who emerges in that space, because I don't really feel like there's anybody filling that space right now. So be
Yeah.
super interesting. So in addition to the tax deferral on the capital gain,
Mm-hmm.
holding it for 5 years, you would then also get a step up in basis. So let's say you put up $100,000 into a fund, and that was the $100,000 of capital gains, right? After 5 years, your tax bill is not going to be quoted off of 100,000. It'd be after off of, like, for a standard QF with the 10% tax step up, it'd be only 90,000 that you'd have to
Right.
pay tax on. So kind of nice. Now, you can always get out of these before,
Mm-hmm.
the 5 years if the fund allows it. There may be some penalties from the fund for doing that. But you only get the tax deferral for the amount of time that you're in it,
Right.
or 5 years, whichever is less. And then the standard exclusion doesn't really help you past 5 years. But certainly if you stay in the fund, then that tax-free appreciation, which is that benefit
Yep.
number 3, comes around. So they still have the tax-free appreciation in there. They did not change that. They did put a limit on it for 30 years. So you can only get the tax-free appreciation for 30 years, and then you have to do something different with it. So that's a little bit. It was just more of a clarification. I don't think they thought to put a date in necessarily
Indeed.
the first
Yeah.
go around, and so they needed to wrap that up. But just like all things, they can only give the tax features for so long. There has to be
Yeah.
a timeline. So
Yeah.
180-day reinvestment period still applies,
Yep.
right?
That did not
Still
change.
applies.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they also made some changes on kind of, I'm going to call it some housekeeping things.
Yeah.
So first of all, putting the additional focus on the rural areas was a big focus of this particular bill.
Mm-hmm.
They're also putting stricter eligibility criteria and eliminating the ability to designate contiguous tracts as QOZ funds. So when you really, I mean, if you really dig into what was designated as a qualified opportunity zone,
Mm-hmm.
there were some things that after they saw how governors and the IRS and everybody looked at the census and decided on these areas, they saw, okay, like they did it correctly, but not everything was necessarily in the spirit of the law. So they just kind of buttoned up a few things there to make it more in line with the effect that they were trying to have. And then lastly, they just increased reporting, as well as implemented some penalties for any non-compliance, to improve the transparency and accountability. So these are most often real estate projects that the investment goes in. It takes a long time to build buildings in these
Yeah.
cities and
Yep.
these areas. So the investments tend to be, and then we're talking 10 years for most people because they want that tax
Mm-hmm.
appreciation. They tend to be long investments, and they just want to make sure the reporting is there, the updates are being made both to shareholders and all interested parties. And so again, it's not necessarily that it wasn't being done as intended, but they just put better parameters in place and then implemented penalties for noncompliance. Because anytime there's a large investment of money going toward a particular area, they want to make sure they have all the rules in place, because these do not trade on the stock market. These are alternative positions. They sit off the stock market. So they don't fall under the same rules as your standard public stock would fall.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of think of like a practical application. So again, like we said, the original program created an environment where the tax benefit was reduced the later that you got into the investment. So the new program makes the benefit of the investment the same for anyone, whether they invest in 2027 or 2037. So it kind of eliminated that where, like she said earlier, if we got to a point where there was only a couple of years left, they're like, "Oh, I don't have that much time to depreciate. I'm not going to do that." So it also restricted to a qualified purchaser too. Like she said, this isn't trade on the stock exchange, so there are qualifications that you have to get to be able to jump into this types of fund. Your tax advisor even must attest that they qualify for the program and timing. So we have to make sure that not just anybody is going to get into this because of the rules and the limitations on that as well.
Yeah, so the tax advisor attesting, they're basically saying, yes, you as a client have this amount of capital gain that's eligible to be invested, and we are within the 180-day window. So, depending on the situation, in our cases, we help place people into qualified opportunity zones. We work with your CPA to
Right.
make sure that you qualify for those things and all the proper paperwork and timing is adhered to. So the application then, is this the right fit for you? So qualified purchaser is a technical term that says, you have to have a certain level of assets to be able to go into something like this. And that's not rules we're setting, that's rules set by the government saying who's allowed to utilize these programs. And I will say that it's usually that kind of rule is put in place to help people not get stuck in something that
Right.
they can't necessarily afford long term, because this is a long term investment. First of all, there's a minimum to this of $250,000. So
Mhm.
you have to be able to put $250,000 of capital gains
Gains.
into this kind of program before you can even start to be considered a reasonable investment for you. You
Right.
also have to be a qualified purchaser and meet those requirements. You have to be within the 180 days. And they're doing that because to get the true tax benefit, you got to be able to let this money sit
Yeah.
for 5 years. And then at that 5 year mark, have other dollars that you're going to use to pay the tax bill on those capital gains,
Right.
or you're going to surrender that investment and then not get to realize the long-term tax-free appreciation. So really, to take the most advantage of this program, you need to have $250,000 of capital gains, be able to put it in this program and leave it for at least 10 years. That would get you the capital gains deferral at the 5 year mark. It
Benefits.
would
Yep.
get you the capital gains step up at that 5 year mark, and it would get you the tax-free appreciation on the investment. You can certainly get out of it sooner, and that might be the right thing for some people. But if you want to get all three tax pieces all together in this, you've got to be able to set aside a pretty good chunk of money for several years.
Right.
So if you're thinking about this and you're like, I might qualify, or I might know somebody that qualifies, and you want to send them our way or reach out to us, we're happy to provide some one-on-one conversations to help people understand if this is something that would make sense for them or not. But regardless, we wanted to do this video just because it's really interesting. It's a very creative piece of the tax code
Right.
that is trying to help private investors, trying to encourage private investors to invest in areas that maybe aren't always financially, something people would go toward, but by giving tax benefits, it entices, more dollars to go to those areas.
That's what we're really good at helping people with is understanding, instead of you having to go take time to read the Big Beautiful Bill Act, we've gone through it kind of fine tooth comb and we're looking for those areas of opportunities that we can help our clients in. So if you're, this is spurred something in you and you maybe just want to have more questions, feel free to reach out to us. We've got information on that and we'd love to help you out.
Thank you, everybody. It was great sharing this information. Give us a call if you need help.
Thanks for joining us today, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the advisors at Sterk Financial. We hope this has been informative and good information for you, and that it helps aid you in your journey of learning more about finance, money, investments, taxes, and different things like that. Have a great day.
Sterk Financial Services celebrated 20 years in 2024. The views expressed are not necessarily the opinion of your audio provider and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities or services mentioned herein. Investing is subject to risks, including loss of principal invested. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. No strategy can ensure a profit nor protect against loss. Please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should only be relied upon when coordinated with individual professional advice. Securities and investment advisory services offered through Osaic Wealth, Inc., member FINRA SIPC. Insurance offered through Sterk Financial Services, which is not affiliated with Osaic Wealth. Osaic Wealth is separately owned, and other entities and/or marketing names, products, or services referenced here are independent of Osaic Wealth. The rankings for the Forbes Best in State Wealth Advisors list by Shook Research is based on due diligence meetings to evaluate each advisor qualitatively, a major component of a ranking algorithm that includes client retention, industry experience, review of compliance records, firm nominations, and quantitative criteria, including assets under management and review generated for their firms. The Forbes ranking of America's top women wealth advisors is based on an algorithm of qualitative and quantitative data, rating thousands of wealth advisors with a minimum of 7 years of experience and weighing factors like revenue trends, assets under management, compliance records, industry experience, and best practices learned through telephone and in-person interviews. There is no fee in exchange for rankings. Forbes is a trademark of Forbes Media LLC. All rights reserved. Rankings and recognition from Forbes, Shook Research are no guarantee of future investment success and do not ensure that a current or prospective client will experience a higher level of performance results, and such rankings should not be construed as an endorsement of the advisor.